This is Martin Giles of the Guildford Dragon News, and today I'm with Tim Anderson, lead member for resources at Guildford Borough Council, and Claire Morris, who is the Director of Resources at the Council. Hello Tim and hello Claire.
Hi.
Welcome to the Guildford Dragon. Okay, and the interview is on the subject of the Guildford Borough Council budget, which was agreed at full council last week. 42 votes in favour, none against, one abstention. It's a rather radical budget, much more radical than normal, forced by the pandemic. And we're going to explore why the decisions were taken. And we should put it against a national context where a lot of other councils are far worse off than Guildford Borough Council, perhaps in particular Croydon, which is pretty well declared bankruptcy and has had to have special measures employed. Now, first of all, Tim, could I ask you for a quick description of your role as the lead counsellor for resources? What does that involve?
Okay, so that's finance, procurement, and commercial assets. So commercial assets like all the properties we own in Middleton and Slyfield. So those are the three pockets of my portfolio. Okay,
and Claire, you're a local government officer, so permanently there in position, and you are the director of that. So how does your role fit in with Tim's?
Yeah, so I'm a permanent member of staff at the council, so I'm the director officer level. So I'm responsible for finance, ICT, HR, legal services and procurement services at the council. And I guess my job is the day-to-day management of those services, liaising with the councillors, and in particular the lead counsellor for resources on various policy issues.
Okay, thank you very much. So in outline, Claire, can you tell me what the rules are that constrain local authority spending? Because I believe there are quite a few constraints on it. Can you just summarise what they are?
Yeah, so essentially the council operates as a series of funds, and those funds have strict ring fences around them and have to be balanced each year. So there's a strict ring fence around our housing fund, which is where the council acts as landlord to the tenants of our council houses. And then there's the general fund, which is basically every other service that the council operates. In addition, there's also strict ring fences around what is revenue, i.e. what is day-to-day spending, and what is capital, i.e. what expenditure do we have on maintaining and developing our assets. And the rules basically mean that you can't use what's known as capital resources to pay for day-to-day revenue costs. So what that means in practice is that we can't use capital receipts, borrowing or Section 106 contributions or anything like that, which are capital resources, to pay for our day-to-day running costs. So to quote some of your readers, Martin, I've read comments on your site where people are querying why we can't stop a particular capital project and use the borrowing to fund the revenue gap that we've got. And the reason is because of the rules around how we have to finance local government.
Okay, so unlike the national government, you can't run a deficit and you can't borrow for the running costs of the council.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so that makes it trickier in these current times, I guess, when your income streams have been reduced.
Yes, yeah, very tricky.
Okay, and we're going to look at those in a bit more detail in a minute. But can you also now summarise what the council's statutory duties are, which you have to fund? Either you or Tim, I don't mind. Which one? Who wants to take that one?
Well, okay, I'll say a bit. So the statutory duties are refuge collection, looking after the homeless, planning and development, control public and environmental health and housing benefits. And discretionary spans over quite a lot of things, but parking, culture and heritage are three of the most important.
Yes, so there are things that by law the things that you have to do, and that means that the pressure comes on those areas where you're not obliged by law to do things, and obviously at a time of constraint, that's the only option you've got in some instances.
Mostly, I mean, obviously, we could look at. We're not planning to, but you know, we do all our refuge collection in-house. You know, a lot of other councils subcontract it. We have no intention of going down the subcontracting route, but that would be an alternative. So you do have a bit of scope with the statutory duties.
Okay, thanks. Coming back to you, Claire, can you outline the council's income streams, i.e. where the money comes from?
Yeah, so our main income streams are council tax, property rents from our investment and industrial properties that we lease out, and car parking. It may surprise you to know that car parking is actually our largest income stream, closely followed by the council tax and then the property rents. And then we also charge a number of fees and charges for other services such as planning or licensing, etc. And then we are able to retain or keep an element of our business rates, but it's the amount of business rates that we collect is only around about 5%, but we're only allowed to keep around about 5% of it. Okay,
so with rents, I guess they're mainly coming in as normal, although I suppose it depends, not entirely as normal, but the car parking has been badly hit during the pandemic, I think.
Yes, we've seen a reduction of over 50% in our car parking income in the last 12 months.
And how are the other income streams fared during the pandemic?
So our leisure services income, so this is income from our leisure centres and various sports bookings of various sports pitches, community hall lettings, that sort of thing, market stall lettings, they're all significantly down on what we had budgeted for and also in comparison to previous years.
Okay, and so the result of that is a shortfall?
Yes.
And the size of that?
Overall, with the additional costs that we've incurred as a result of COVID as well, the shortfall's around about 8 million this year.
This year alone?
Yeah.
Okay, and can you now, we've talked about the income stream, what about where the money gets spent rather? What are the main cost centres?
So in a normal year, our main service areas of expenditure are things like waste and recycling, parks and countryside, licensing activities, regulatory services, and housing and homelessness.
Okay, and what's been the impact of the pandemic there on the spending?
So we've had to introduce a number of additional services, such as providing support to those people that are clinically vulnerable and have needed to shield during the crisis. So we've introduced things like food parcels and a vulnerable persons helpline for those people. We've also incurred additional costs in supporting the operators of the leisure management contract and also the G Live Theatre. So they're taking a lot of additional money to keep the buildings closed at the moment, because obviously there's still building costs and utility costs and things that we have to pay for to keep those buildings in a condition that we will be able, hopefully, to reopen them once the lockdown is through.
Okay, thank you, Claire. If I can turn to you then, Tim. There's also that you've got an investment portfolio. What's been the impact on that, and what's the plan there?
Well, largely it's held up. The industrial properties on Slyfield and Middleton have held up very well. And in fact, Middleton is going through a refurbishment and the new properties are just flying off the shelf. They're very, very popular. So we get about £8.5 million per year from those kind of properties. We also have some properties. We own the freehold of some restaurants. We've had to give them some rent-free period because clearly they can't trade during lockdowns. I think it's about 10 shops, 10 properties in total in what you might call the Greater High Street, where we've had to give rent-free periods and so on. But that's a very small part of our portfolio, so the impact is thankfully very small.
Okay, and is all the portfolio made up of property?
Yeah, I mean, the commercial assets portfolio is all about property. We also have a treasury investments that gave us 1.3 million in income in the last year. So that's a good contributor to the budget as well.
Oh, okay. So there is some non-property investment as well.
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
we have investment managers who invest in funds.
Okay. And is all the property within the borough?
Yes.
Okay. That's a rule, is it? That's the rule that the council has imposed on itself.
Well, it's the policy that we follow, absolutely, and other councils haven't done it. The county hasn't done it, and we've been more conservative in our approach, and we've reaped the rewards for being so.
Okay, and Claire, can you tell me what help you've got through the pandemic year from the central government that's been extra to the normal provision they give?
Yeah, so we've received around about £2 million in general grant from the government to help with the expenditure that we've incurred. And apologies, I should have mentioned increased costs of homelessness in my previous answer as well, because under the Everybody In scheme, we have been incurring substantial costs in relation to housing homelessness people in various areas.
Excuse me for interrupting there, Claire, but so just to explain, as far as I understand it, that means that we've been paying, or Guildford has been paying to provide accommodation for these people so that everyone's in shelter.
Yes, and protected hopefully from the pandemic.
But they're not necessarily in Guildford, are they? Maybe this is for Tim. Right.
We house them all over the place,
Right.
but we've put quite a number of people in hotels and B&Bs in Guildford, but we do have to go out of borough in some circumstances.
What, simply because to get the accommodation available?
Yes.
Okay, and yeah, so you were saying about the central government, you had 2 million, did you say, extra from them?
Yeah, so we've had £2 million extra in terms of general government grant and specific grants for things like COVID marshals. And then we've also received around about 4.5 million as compensation for the loss of income that we're incurring. But the amount that we are getting in government grant does not cover the full cost and loss of income streams that we've been incurring.
Okay, so the extra spending from the pandemic has not been covered by the extra income from the government?
Not all of it, no.
And this comes against a background over the last decade of the government grants largely drying up. That's correct, isn't it? Yes.
So we don't, in a normal year, we would not get any general government grants from the government anymore. That finished in 2018, 2019. What we do get is, or what we do is we keep an element of our business rates that we collect. But just to give you an example, we collect around about £90 million of business rates in a normal year in Guildford, and the council only keeps just under 5 million of that.
Okay.
So it's about 5%.
Okay. So now, what about the reserves, Tim? They've proved essential over this last year, and thank goodness we had them. But how will you build them back up? Because who knows what's in the future?
Well, yes, we used about 8 million in reserves to balance the current year, but that we haven't used any reserves to balance the 21-22 budget. We've been able to balance that. Our priority one is to get the next few years balance up until 2024-25. Currently, we have approximately a £6 million deficit that we have got to find either more income or more savings in order to balance that budget. That's the process we're going through at the moment. Once we've cracked that, then we can turn our attention to how we can generate sufficient extra income to start building our reserves.
Okay, so in the short term, medium term, it's lean times and perhaps more savings unless we can identify more revenue streams. And the building up the reserves will have to be put off for a few years, and therefore we've got a bit of a higher risk if anything else happens in that time.
Well, I wouldn't say I'm not saying we're putting off increasing the reserves as soon as, in the next year or whatever. The thing is, we can't start to apply our minds to it until we've cracked balancing the budget over the next few years. So it's just a sequential process, that's all. Okay, so it looks like there will need to be some economies made in different areas. What decisions have you reached on where they're going, where the cuts are going to come? Well, we went through the process for the 2021-22 budget resulted in us looking at 27 different lines of expenditure, and we will apply the same kind of rigor to the future budgets that we're going to balance. And we're looking at every area of expenditure. And our approach is not to have any sacred cows that are ring fenced. Everything will be challenged, and then there will be a democratic process. It will be recommendations will go to an executive advisory board, which in turn makes its recommendations to the executive, which in turn makes its recommendations to the full council. So it'll all be clear, transparent, but we hope to be able to start that, make the recommendations within the next 3 months.
Now, several specific areas were mentioned in the budget debate. Firstly, Councillor Spooner made a point about how important the cultural sector within Guildford was. What can we expect to happen there, given that, you might not have enough money to go around?
Well, currently we give the Yvonne Arnaud Theatre, which is an independent theatre, £320,000 per year. And, we will challenge this now. Is it right that the ratepayer is subsidising an independent theatre to the tune of this kind of amount of money? And we need to have a discussion with the Yvonne Arnaud about, could they find alternative sources of income so that we could reduce that total progressively over a number of years. And that's the kind of difficult decision we're going to face, because we recognise that one of the attractive things about Guildford, the reason we get a big tourist trade, which is obviously lucrative for the town, is because we have, several theatres, we have a big cultural base, we have a beautiful historical town. All these things we've got to make sure we preserve. This is not a process of slash and burn. This is considered challenges to spending, which perhaps should have happened in the past.
Okay. And what about those that are worried about the museum? Is it at risk of closure, or is it simply that money that you were hoping to spend on it can't now be spent on it?
It's the capital programme has been stopped at the moment. The number was 18.26 million in capital investment, and obviously that has an impact on our revenue account as well. And so that by reducing that and 3 other capital projects, it contributed to balancing the 21-22 budget, and will contribute to future years' budgets. So, the museum is intact. We're not closing it. I think it's closed at the moment for obvious reasons, But no, that this is about reducing the capital spend. And, you know, in the future, another project can come forward, and if it's sufficiently well put together and argued, then, you know, the council can decide on a new capital programme to improve the museum.
Okay, another cut that was discussed was the financing of the Citizens Advice Bureaus, both in Ash and in Guildford. What have you got in mind for those?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, Martin, because a lot of fuss was made about that. And at the time, I didn't know the numbers, but I do now. So the original proposed funding for 21-22 for all those two Citizen Advice Bureaus was £311,750, not an inconsiderable amount. The new proposal is to reduce that amount by 4%. 4.0%, a tiny amount, to £300,000.
Right.
And that means reducing the expenditure in Ash by £1,450, well within the capability of Ash Parish Council to make up the difference, or perhaps to find a corporate sponsor who would contribute. In my previous life, I did a lot of pro bono work for Citizens Advice Bureaus on the request of one of my clients, a big international bank. They contributed a lot of money to the Citizens Advice Bureaus in central London. You know, I think, you know, the more I've got absorbed in this job, the more, and this budgeting process has happened, the more I've found that Guildford has been far too often the first port of call when anybody's short of money. And that's got, you know, we've got to challenge that. Okay,
but why, if it's only £12,000, why reduce it at all?
Well, it's a small amount. Then the next year we want to reduce it by £25,000, so 8%, and another 25,000 the following year, which is another 9%. So these are small, careful, incremental reductions over a period. So we're starting gently and gradually increasing it a little bit more in the following years.
Okay, but do you accept the point made that actually the CAB services are often provided for people in trouble and can save money by addressing their problems at an early stage?
Oh, I think the Citizens Advice Bureau is a brilliant service. As I said, I've had hands-on, first-hand experience of it. But it doesn't mean to say Guildford has to pay quite so much. You know, there is room for others to contribute, as I said, like Ash Parish Council.
Yes, now you mentioned them, and I know that they do have quite considerable reserves built up. In fact, it has been said that they've got more in their reserve than any other parish council. I haven't checked that for a fact, but nonetheless, and the council leader, Josh Bigmore, mentioned that during the debate, or he mentioned, you know, perhaps Ash Parish Council could help. Have they been addressed? Have they been spoken to about that?
This has happened very quickly, Martin, and I'm somewhat at arm's length in terms of dealing with Ash Parish Council, but it is something I intend to address as soon as possible.
Okay, and finally, Ripley Village Hall, it was mentioned their funding survives, so the plan for their Village Hall refurbishment or rebuild is going to carry on.
Well, yes, in colloquial terms, it's falling down, the current building. And so it needs demolition and rebuilding. We committed to helping Ripley pay for that in January of 2020. We can't let them down. You know, they've got a budget, they've got plans in place. So the project has gone on too far for us to pull the plug on it. And apart from which, it's in urgent need of happening.
Now, Tim, Claire's team, I'll spare her blushes, but I mean, she has her and her team have a reputation for very sound financial management at the council. So does that leave you optimistic for the future?
At the full council meeting last week, speaker after speaker rightly praised the work that Claire and her team do. It's absolutely first rate. They couldn't be more supportive of me and more patient with me, taking me through all the details. And yes, you know, we will crack this. We have to crack this. But I did find some of the attitudes at the council meeting unfortunate, that people are digging their heels in straight away and not looking at this in the round. This is not a trivial matter. You know, this has been an extraordinary episode in the whole country's, the whole world's life, and it's had financial implications for Guildford the same way as it has for our central government, which has borrowed out unbelievable amounts of money. But you know, so yeah, I mean, I'm very optimistic we'll get it done. I think we're going to have a few bumps in the road where people try and dig their heels in, but hopefully they will see that this is a necessary process that we have to go through.
Tim Anderson and Claire Morris, thank you both very much for giving the time and explaining the budget, and good luck with the future of management of it.
Thank you.
Martin.